Quicksilver Messenger service from many years ago, singing their version of today's lesson. God is in everything I see because God is in my mind. Um, Later on, you're going to make an even more spectacular discovery when you learn that God is actually the mind with which you think. And we're told today that this lesson is the springboard for vision. From this idea will the world open up before you, and you will look upon it and see in it what you've never seen before, nor will what you saw be even faintly visible to you. So this is one of the lessons, and it's a good indication of the necessity of only having to do these lessons and go through the workbook one time. It's not that every time you see through the mind of God from your own eyes, it'll look new each and every time. It's not that that's not true, but what is true is that in attempting to do this lesson a second time after you've already had this happen to you would be a denial of the fact that it worked the first time, and there's no need to do that anymore. We'll go through this workbook one time, and as it says in the end, you'll be turned over to the Holy Spirit for the individual lessons that we all have coming to us. That the learning that we get, that we glimpse, that we take with us, that we carry with us in our mind as we go through these lessons will be available to us for application when the Holy Spirit brings us those individual lessons, which is why this makes it, and this is why it becomes an individual process of awakening. Each and every one of us has made a world, has made an ego, has made egos for each other, and those particular ideas within us, each one of us, that allows us to think separation is real, and yet upon the undoing of that thinking, we recognize that not only is consciousness, the dream that we call consciousness, one, but the kingdom of heaven is one, and the kingdom of heaven is all around us. It's within us, as above, so below, as within, so without. So today, as he tells us, today, and I want to address something in the second paragraph. Today we are trying to use a new kind of projection. Now, to many Course in Miracles students, the word projection has come to be misunderstood as something that we don't want to do. And in a sense, it becomes, it's been seen or thought to be misuse rather than true use. But if we're reading the Course, we understand that God creates by projection, by projecting himself out further. And we are that projection. This may not mean anything to people, and it may seem like it's splitting hairs or it's just semantics, but the whole and perfect, singular and total mind of God, which we are all part of, would never be capable of two distinct actions. Let's call one action projection and one action extension. The whole and perfect mind of God would not be capable of two actions. It's a single, whole, creative flow of its reality. That it does extend the kingdom as we are the extension of the kingdom, but the action of mind that by which creation occurs is projection. So the new kind of projection that we're going to learn today, so that projection can have a true and positive, in a sense, meaning we are not attempting to get rid of what we do not like by seeing outside. Instead, we are trying to see in the world what is in our mind and what we want to recognize is there. And God is in everything I see because God is in my mind. And what we want to see and want to begin to recognize is the godly or divine nature within ourself, and therefore within the entire world of creation. Um, there are some distinctions that are often made, such as the difference between the earth, let's say, and the world. The earth, as a solid structure, is part of the illusion of space and time. But the world, as God created and projects, remember, nothing leaves the mind. Nothing goes out and leaves its source. So as a projection of God's mind, the world, and us as part and parcel of that world, has never left the mind of God, nor have any of our thoughts, in spite of our use of projection in, let's call it the negative way, as the desiring to get rid of what we don't want by kicking it out. This is an integration. It's a recognition of what is in our mind, the fearful as well as the beatific, so as to understand that a single whole reality of love could never actually contain anything fearful, and the allowance for our vision to become beatific, to light up everything we see with the beauty of the mind of God, becomes available to us as we pursue lessons in a workbook of A Course in Miracles. Thus, we are trying to join with what we see rather than keep it apart from us. That is the fundamental difference between vision and the way you see now. I mean, the way that we see now is an attempt to get rid of that which we don't want by seeing it outside of ourselves, and thinking that by changing what is outside of ourselves, we can get rid of that which we don't want. And thinking that by seeing things outside of ourselves, it's not us that has those thoughts, but something other that we can be victim of, rather than the recognition that, the only thing that can victimize us is our own attempt to project what is within us outside of us because we fail to want it. We fail to recognize that it is ours. In a sense, begin to look at, the projections of your mind as your children, and the availability and the necessity to learn to love your own thoughts. We've been afraid of our thoughts. We've forgotten that which we see outside of us are actually our own thoughts, and we're being given the ability to change our mind, and not to change our mind in the sense that we decide what we don't like and then attempt to decide what we like, but an attempt to change our mind from seeing the separation as our reality and the allowance for the joining, the recognition of what we are joined and whole and perfect with, and begin to see the light within ourselves that is the light of God, as we become the light of the world and looking about and extending that light, allowing that light to be our reality. Early on in some of the revelatory episodes at the beginning, for me, the teaching that I was given was as above, so below, as within, so without. And that has become, in a sense, how I've learned to look upon everything so as to heal my own mind. So when we say, for instance, if we look at God as the mind of which I think, if we're seeing and experiencing horrific things, then I'm thinking with the horrific mind of separation, fear, and hatred. and the desire to kill and be killed. And I will get the result of that in my experience. Now, it won't make it real as if it exists in the kingdom, but it certainly will make it real within our experience of ourselves here in space and time. And we don't have to live like that, because that is not life. Life is eternal, meaning death is impossible. And as we're going to read in further on the lesson, it is also infinite. So today's idea should be applied as often as possible throughout the day. Whenever you have a moment or so, repeat it to yourself slowly. Look about you, look around you, trying to realize that the idea applies to everything you do see now or could see now if it were within the range of your sight. Here comes the unlimited nature of your own whole perfect mind. Real vision is not limited to concepts such as near and far. To help you begin to get used to this idea, try to think of things beyond your present range as well as those you actually can see as you apply today's lesson, and understand there's no difference. There's absolutely no difference. Does that give rise to ideas such as remote viewing? Of course it does. Is remote viewing the goal of A Course in Miracles? Of course not. Does that give rise to clairvoyance and to be able to see the past as well as the future? Of course it does. And as we open our minds, these type of experiences will become available to many of us, not because they are true, but because they may be helpful in the pursuit and the fulfillment of our function. There's an admonition in the text that Jesus says, he says, along the way, as we pursue this, not merely in this year that we've taken to set aside to do the workbook, but remember, at the end of this, it's just the beginning. So along the way, we're going to have many, many, many type of experiences. And what he tells us is only the experiences that are in line with what it is the Course is attempting to teach us about the truth of who we are and our ability to fulfill our function in God's plan should be given any value. And when he says value, it's tantamount to saying they're useful. Eventually, we begin to think of things, all things, as whether it is useful to the fulfillment of our function or if it's not useful. In that sense, if it's useful, therefore valuable, it will stay with us for as long as we require it to be valuable and as long as it's necessary in our pursuit. When it is no longer valuable, therefore no longer useful, it will simply fall away of itself, because your mind can only hold that which you give value to. And you'll begin to recognize, as he says, when we have these major experiences, we recontextualize our understanding of ourself. So in that sense, we make a new self-concept based on the new experiences that we have. But don't stop just because you like the new self-image that you've come to know, because no image of you will be true. No image of you will be satisfying in the end. No self-concept other than you as in a whole perfect idea in the mind of God, as a projection of his reality and the extension of his love. No image will ever be true. You're whole and perfect. You're a child of light. And that may be something that gets published soon. Early on in Jesus' conversation with Helen, he tells her she is a child of light. And children of light come together in constellations of light in order to fulfill the function necessary within the plan for salvation. And as that child of light in those constellations, when those constellations have served their purpose, they get rearranged to continue to serve new purposes simply because you're able to within the new recognition of who you are, and with the loss of fear of losing yourself. I mean, everybody's terrified that they're going to lose their mind. Well, that's what the ego wants you to, because if you lose the egoic mind, you'll remember that you're a child of light. And in that freedom, you won't bind yourself to limitation, which is what this is hinting at when he talks about the fact that real vision is not limited to concepts such as near and far. And to help you begin to get used to this idea, try to think of things beyond your present range, beyond that narrow band of visual acuity that you attribute sight to, and which you give reality to that sight because you think, because you see it, and therefore experience it, it is all that there is. I assure you that it's not. We're part of a universe of universes, an eternal, whole, perfect, infinite reality. And that is God, and that is in our mind. And we're learning to utilize that mind as a new way of seeing. Fear not that you'll be hurled into reality. Your awakening is going to keep gentle pace with the lessons that you learn into the totality of awakening that we all require is complete. And we are returned to our natural home in the mind of God. And we begin once again where we seem to have left off, as creative principalities in the kingdom of heaven itself. So, if you have nothing else to do today, you have a few minutes between lessons, between the application. God is in everything I see because God is in my mind. Look for a Quicksilver messenger service, all in my mind, and begin to recognize that these aren't new ideas. The muses of our time have been preparing, have been opening up the world for us to move into right behind them, as they learn through the opening of their mind lessons that perhaps we were not prepared to learn along with them at the time with which they're learning. But I assure you, you couldn't be reading this lesson today unless you were ready to begin to understand that God is in my mind, and we can use God's mind to see. And what we see will be unlike anything we've seen before in the past or could anticipate seeing in the future. Remember, seeing with the mind of God is not confined to the definition that you give it. It's a whole perfect experience of seeing beyond the illusion of limitation and separation, and the direct perception of the infinite and eternal kingdom of love that we are whole